Jiri Prochazka is perhaps one of the most beloved fighters of the modern era, with his exciting style, strange samurai ideology stemming from the Book of Five Rings, and eccentric personality that one could generously define as potential security threat. His unstable-looking striking style is his defining characteristic, something simultaneously as silly and chaotic as it is effective. He fights like you exclusively trained Muay Thai on acid, using a bunch of fundamentally sound strategies, like emphasis on the jab, stance switching to present varied attacks, and using angles to throw underused attacks in MMA, such as uppercuts or framing for knees and elbows. He's even looked better at defense in his most recent fight versus Jamal Hill, where he displayed some truly beautiful head movement. All of this is well and good, but something that interests me about Jiri is his grappling. Unlike other knockout artists who leave themselves vulnerable to takedowns, Jiri is not helpless on the ground. He's not prone to being submitted or even just simply being controlled to a decision, with 0 losses by decision on his record, only 4 by knockout, and 1 by submission, albeit this was in 2013 when he was only 21 years old, my age at the time of writing this. In other words, his grappling is weirdly effective, despite a training regimen I could only imagine consists of cuddling wombats and mastering his spiritual energy. As someone who primarily trains grappling myself, being a few years into BJJ and wrestling, this fascinates me. I refuse to accept that this is a fluke due to the sample size we're working with, so I resolved to do a film study of his fights, observe his grappling, figure out why it works more often than not, and where he can improve. I've narrowed down our case study to 9 fights with extended grappling exchanges, starting with his time in Reyes, as well there is some select footage of his regional MMA fights, including a few submission victories. I'm not overly interested in watching 20-something Jiri sloppily apply a triangle choke in a grimy gym without even turning the corner correctly. While there are some clinch grappling exchanges in some of the fights I've omitted, I'm more so interested in takedowns, takedown defense, and ground fighting, and thus we're left with a 9-fight sample. I will not review the striking within these fights unless it's ground and pound, as both I'm not an expert, and it's not what I want to look at, quite simply. I did watch every Jiri fight publicly available prior to this, so hopefully I didn't miss anything. Before we begin, I will, however, explain a few reference points that will become important later. Craig Jones is one of the most influential grappling minds of the modern age, with one of his most important contributions coming from his Power Ride instructional, where he detailed how many jiu-jitsu control positions are largely defective when you take into account wrestling rides. There's an incredibly brilliant 25-minute summary of the Power Ride instructional available on YouTube by Rixty Garami. I will actually link that in the description. I expect you to check it out as well if you like my analysis here. Amongst these defective positions are full mount and especially side control, where one can easily build power with their feet connected to the mat and explode up if they're not properly pinned. Whilst I doubt Jiri has seen anything by Craig Jones, I think he fundamentally understands this concept, and he is going to mog the traditional position hierarchy of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu through sheer force of being a freak, albeit in an incredibly intelligent fashion. Finally, a base in wrestling is any situation in which you have your knees firmly planted on the ground with a strong posture. If you have your knees under you, wrestling up to the feet is always an option. We begin with a truly challenging fight for young Prochazka, one Vadim Nemkov, a student of the legendary Fyodor Emelianenko, current top PFL heavyweight, and former Bellator light heavyweight champion. This is a win that's aged like fine wine of the record of Jiri, and very interestingly, comes from Nemkov quitting after the first round. To understand what caused this tough-as-nails Russian to quit in front of one of the scariest cornermen in sports, let's look at this fight. The first proper grappling exchange comes from Vadim responding to pressure with a shot, dumping Jiri to the ground. For all intents and purposes, this should be an easy takedown into side control for Nemkov, but Jiri gets his knees in as soon as the takedown is completed, maintaining a knee shield as the guard exchange begins. It's evident to me by the end of the study that Jiri is a prodigy at retaining and regaining his guard. Something we'll see time and time again throughout the study as he weaponizes his lanky limbs to be a fly in the ointment. Jiri grabs a guillotine grip and hooks the far side leg of Nemkov with his right, pushing in to face the danger and to get to front headlock. Jiri is something of a specialist in scrambles, fundamentally understanding that most people in MMA suck at front chokes and or working from the north-south position, and thus he willingly put himself there because he knows he won't have to face significant threats in most cases. Proving Jiri correct, Nemkov first grabs an anaconda choke but bails, and as they start to stand up, tries to go into a mounted guillotine. While trying to take mount is much better than pulling the ghillie in surrendering position, Nemkov goes too far to the side, ending in something akin to scarf hold with a guillotine grip. Jiri seems to always understand when he is or isn't in danger from a choke and turns in to get up. A little bit later, and Jiri is taken down again with what looks to me like a knee pick, but it's hard to tell from the camera angle. Jiri lands in half guard, but almost immediately gets to full guard. Understanding that he doesn't want to stay in close guard with a can opener / ground and pound merchant from the Fyodor lineage, Jiri throws up an armbar. It's nowhere close to being finished, and he's stacked back to full guard, where he gets his shit kicked in until he does a move emblematic of his scramble-based ground fighting. Nemkov gets too wild throwing ground and pound, and Jiri creates enough space to spin counterclockwise and essentially pass his own guard for Nemkov. This sounds like a bad idea, but as many a modern grappler like Craig Jones will tell you, side control is bullshit. So he uses the momentum of the spin to get back to his knees, and just like that, he is right back up. Nemkov continues to get beat up until shooting a takedown so goddamn bad that Jiri takes mount, before taking the back as Vadim turns to get up. This would be good, but unfortunately Jiri has no idea what the hell he's doing. And Nemkov is able to turn in because Jiri is completely flattened out and unable to grip fight well. Jiri gets up basically for free, and then later Nemkov tries the same shitty takedown again, knowing how Jiri is going to counter, and instead being the one to take mount this time, a very intelligent move from a man I've been clowning on for a bit. Jiri tries to minimize damage before Nemkov goes for an armbar. The Samurai's defense to this is one you'll see throughout his fights, and he responds with a beautiful back roll. It's such a pro-wrestling looking counter, but smooth and effortless in a way that allows Jiri to get top. He stands up out of the guard and comes in with a great standing pass, smothering Nemkov chest to chest. He gets the back as his opponent tries to stand up, and even has a few half-decent choke attempts, but it's evident at this stage in his career that Jiri has a white belt understanding of the position, even if his instincts are good, as he allows Nemkov to misalign out of the position. It's a super common mistake low-level grapplers make when getting complacent on the back into something easily fixable, which Jiri actually will improve on later on. Nemkov gets back to top before we see another key ingredient of the Prochazka grind set, willingly putting himself in north-south because anyone not named Marcelo Garcia sucks at the position. He beats up Nemkov some more before getting a front kick caught, and shortly after the takedown is completed, the round is over. Vadim is so exhausted he can't even get up, and just like that, Jiri is won. While his striking may not be efficient, Jiri's grappling is, and despite how raw of a prospect he is at this point, we've seen a few of the keys that will make him great. While I have no idea what the hell his actual grappling training regimen is, his willingness to put himself in positions like front headlock, side control, and north-south suggests to me that he fundamentally understands pins, and that if you aren't pinned, then the option to wrestle up is always available. Remember kids, jiu-jitsu is fake, and with enough autism, you can always opt out. Versus King Mo, first fight. Having passed Nemkov in a fight that was the semifinals of the quote-unquote heavyweight Grand Prix, Jiri finds himself with an important test in Muhammad Law, aka King Mo, a proper American wrestler with an amazing pedigree, competing at the World Championships on a few occasions before transitioning to MMA. This fight is mostly what I would describe as a avant-garde boxing match, but Mo times the shot really well, which lands him a lot of control time in Jiri's guard. Jiri does a really good job of minimizing damage throughout most of the time on the ground, but it's a deeply passive exchange. Only after Mo lands a few strikes and attempts to stack for a pass does Jiri get his tools online, as my teacher, Coach Kenny, would say. Putting in a knee shield seems to annoy the wrestling standout. Trust me, I get it. Beating the knee shield is a current hyperfixation of mine as someone with a wrestling-first mindset. Jiri is able to switch back and forth between the knee shield and weird grip fighting in order to create good enough space to get back up, and it's truly really good stuff. Unfortunately for him, he gets fucking flatlined on the feet, so strangely in a fight between a Czech striker and American wrestler, the Yank won on the feet, and Slavic Weirdo proved effective, if not dominant, in the grappling. While I wish I could have seen more grappling between the two, as their rematch, which Jiri wins, is entirely a boxing fight for the most part, Jiri appears to have a really good ideology to at least hinder a dominant wrestler. Versus Kazuyuki Fujita. It's a classic Pride fighter and a classic Pride-style mismatch, as Jiri seeks to rebound from his KO loss versus a man conservatively 4 billion years old. While there's no real ground fighting, we can observe Jiri's evolving takedown defense, as he maximizes his length as a fighter to twist and spin out of a single leg. Even after Ol Ironhead times a kick correctly in order to take Jiri down to the mat and land some strikes, Jiri makes sure that he falls to his knees, that aforementioned wrestling base, keeping that very strong and allowing himself to calmly stand back up despite the chaos. He gets back up and lands the knockout shortly thereafter. While I considered omitting this from the study, this is the first time we see Jiri defend a shot in space well, and we'll see his single leg defense continue to evolve, especially against Glover Teixeira, the masterpiece of his grappling we'll get to later. This fight is a proper glitch in the matrix, the sole decision on Jiri's MMA record, and it couldn't come against a more nondescript opponent, the 18-2 Lebanese enigma Mark Tanios. The man with salon-quality hair and a dad bod retired on a win streak, oddly enough, so if you're out there, Mr. Tanios, thank you for your service to MMA history for somehow going to a decision with Jiri. The can of soup out of Beirut has a pretty fun if muted striking battle with Jiri until the second round. When of all possible occurrences, Jiri actually lands a takedown, hitting a really cheeky foot sweep / trip from the over-under clinch that comes as wholly unexpected. It's part of Jiri's game I would like to see him reincorporate in the future, as the light heavyweight division is primarily full of strikers. I think mixing in Muay Thai style foot sweeps would work great against a lot of the strikers at the top, as trying to take down someone from the over-under clinch is much more of a surprise attack than the shitty single legs Jiri employs when he wants to take someone down, mostly only if he gets rocked. If I could go back in time and train him for Alex Pereira again, I think abusing the clinch would actually be a large part of my game plan for him. You can take this with a grain of salt because I'm a moron, but as a kickboxer, Alex tries to basically brute force his way out of the clinch, panicking when he ends up there in space. But he does have slightly more technical grappling against the cage wall. I think he could be foot swept or judo thrown pretty easily, something I wish either Jiri or Khalil Roundtree had attempted with their Muay Thai. Back to the matter at hand, however, we see some rare top game from Jiri, using can openers and stacking to create platforms for ground and pound. While it doesn't look devastating, Tanios clearly doesn't like it, surrendering side control to Jiri, who goes straight to knee on belly in a beautiful, incredibly fluent sequence. He then hits a beautiful hip switch to transition to the Kisagatame, or as a catch wrestler I would call it a scarf hold, driving Tanios back into an eventual pinned side control. Like I said, Jiri really seems to understand pins, and while Tanios is able to flail enough for an armbar attempt that stands them back up, it's some technically sound top game from the Samurai. Fairly shortly thereafter, the round and fight ends, possibly due to lack of interest. I have no idea why there wasn't a third round, but Jiri was handily winning. Good job, buddy. We return to high-level competition, at least in Ryzen terms, versus the only other man to date to hold a victory over Vadim Nemkov, albeit via split decision, one Carl Albertson. I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I'm parroting how commentary says his name, but, this is a Swedish man's name, and I'm probably saying it wrong. A man whose base for MMA is, no shit, wushu and hockey. This is very interesting for our case study because basically everything that can go wrong for Jiri does, and he still pulls it out because he's built different. After roughly a minute and a half of striking, Karl grabs a body lock and hits a beautiful outside trip on Jiri, dropping him straight into pinned half guard. Karl does everything right in terms of control, flattening Jiri and grabbing a BJJ crossface, distinct from what I would call a crossface in wrestling terms. Jiri tries to hand fight and minimize damage, but he's not going for the strong side underhook you need to regain control. He tries to shrimp to the side as he usually does this, and it allows him to either wrestle up or get his knee shield in, but he's smashed against the corner and can't do much. Not a whole lot happens for several minutes, and Jiri gets beat up. He's able to retain guard, but that doesn't really help in a sport like MMA, where control time is incentivized, and people will specifically not pass half guard in order to land damage. Quite frankly, he is losing. To get out, he needs the underhook, which he finally does get, and gets his shoulders off the mat, eliminating the pin. As simple as that, he gets to his feet. What's interesting is that it seems like he could have dug for the underhook at any point, and not doing so was a moment of very low MMA IQ, something surprisingly uncommon in Jiri fights. He outstrikes Karl for a while, but our Swedish friend grabs the body lock once again, eschewing the outside trip for an inside trip, something Henry Cejudo uses to great effect in MMA. We're back to that pinned half guards until Jiri explodes, getting back up before shortly getting the knockout. This whole fight is sloppy and relatively uncharacteristic of our beloved samurai. Everyone has off nights, but his otherwise tremendous defensive grappling couldn't get started, and it's a warning sign to Jiri, that in his own words, he must evolve. Jiri returns the competition against an American wrestler in Halsey, who has some lovely Captain America shorts. Halsey almost immediately shoots for an uber-low single, chain wrestling in a way that I personally love. Halsey abandons the single but gets the back in a very slick way, already having in one hook from his ride. Jiri employs our so-called Michael Chandler defense I'll elaborate on later, but the punches are too much and he has to face the danger, ending in pinned half guard. Knowing he needs to get up immediately, he gives up half guard and goes to side control, something we saw earlier against Nemkov. From here he tries to get to his base and stand up, but the savvy Halsey pulls at his leg out from under him, diving into a mounted ghillie. Jiri thankfully is as tough as nails and decides to turtle, allowing Halsey, who's a lot worse at BJJ than he is, to fall off. Jiri plays Matador for a while, and even flings Brandon out of the ring in humorous fashion, reminding us why the UFC is not in a ring. To quote Jack Slack, who of course very much inspired this film study, the ring is to the cage as a tea strainer is to a condom. It fails to contain the action and often gets messy. Finally, after a standing ghillie attempt, Halsey is able to take down Jiri, also nearly taking out the ref, but Prochazka turtles immediately and gets to his wrestling base. For whatever reason, he leaves his neck open as the commentators are basically laughing at him, but Halsey allows him to misalign and thus our samurai takes time. Jiri beats the piss out of the wrestler and knocks him out. This is interesting and sort of similar to our King Mo match, as against an actual wrestler, Jiri can't mog positional jiu-jitsu, being susceptible to wrestling rides in particular. However, he still understands how to play both to his strengths and the weaknesses of his opponent, allowing Halsey to go from a wrestling ride he's fluent in to a BJJ position he's not. She's not pretty, but she flies, and while Jiri might not be able to make the castle in 12 parsecs, he can beat a wrestler using his entire toolbox. This one is going to be brief because every grappling exchange is a meme, so I'm covering it less for technique but more so for my own amusement. Reyes, while beloved by everyone, has a grappling acumen I'd paraphrase Bob Sapp described, being not BJJ, wrestling, catch wrestling, judo, etc., but what I'll call NFL style. Reyes hits one of the funniest takedowns I've seen work, hitting a weird leg hook trip thingy from an over-under clinch that looks like he didn't even expect it to work himself. Jiri is largely unbothered and just explodes back up. The incredibly funny part comes from when Reyes pulls a ghillie, as once again Jiri understands that almost all MMA front chokes are bullshit. He uses his ridiculously long body to pin Reyes to the mat while just hopping over his leg, and shit gets very silly. Reyes reguards and Jiri stands up to pass, and as soon as he does, Reyes hits him with a lovely upkick, causing Jiri to faceplant to the mat, pulling side control via basically getting knocked out. He lays there dying for a while before standing back up, and then proceeds to hit one of the coolest knockouts of the 21st century. There is nothing to critically analyze here, but to quote Violent George Costanza, they going at it, it's real, it's good. This fight against Glover Teixeira is without a doubt Jiri's masterpiece, as he not just survives, but thrives against an elite grappler and legend of the sport in Glover. Glover's game is completely optimized to crush strikers, with his relentless pressure on the feet coming from feinted overhands that he either chains into a high crotch takedown, single leg, or his devastating left hook, all of which he had employed to lethal precision in his previous bout with Jan Blachowicz. Against a jiu-jitsu athlete, grappler, and overall MMA fighter like Glover, he's ideally going to need to be flawless. True to Jiri's nature, he isn't flawless, but so particular in his stratagems that he's going to walk out of this the new champion. About a minute in, Glover goes for his classic overhand and the high crotch, the dexterous and long-limbed Jiri hopping around on one foot until Glover fully elevates his leg above his head, completing the takedown in the full guard of Jiri, who even as he falls, makes sure to retain guard. After enduring a beating that he's partially able to block, Jiri gives up the back, sitting out in the position in a very wrestling-coded move I'll use myself when working from the turtle sometime. Thank you, Zane, for letting me steal that. Glover, the savvy veteran, while not able to get the choke, grabs his own forearm to keep the control around the head. Jiri stays poised and employs what my brother and I have coined the Michael Chandler position, which is where you grab a 2-on-1 on the choking arm and pull it to the wrong side of your head, almost like you're about to hit the silliest version of a Sayanage. I've dubbed it this because this simple but effective defense somehow allowed Iron Mike to go 2 fights with Charles Oliveira without being rear naked choked, something that fighters with a better jiu-jitsu pedigree, like alleged black belt Dustin Poirier, or absolute legend Jim Miller, cannot boast. Jiri sits out and then willingly falls backwards, putting himself into a deep north-south. Much like crawling under your opponent while not crushed is ideal in the bottom of front headlock to eventually hit a go-behind, staying deep like this in north-south is great, as you can do any number of weird-ass attacks. The two go into it, then out of, then into, once again, a proper balls-in-mouth north-south as Jiri circles to face the cage in order to kick off. He explodes off the cage and into a front headlock, and just like that, he's back up. Unfortunately for the samurai, he gets hit with the same simple single leg, turning and rolling like a freak away, which unfortunately gives up mount. Jiri's getting a shit beat out of him until Glover attempts to walk his arm up for an arm triangle, which leads to one of the silliest things I've ever seen. Jiri sticks the point of his elbow into the fence. Shout out to Jack Slack for pointing this out, which is technically legal as you're not supposed to put your fingers or toes into the cage, leaving the elbow technically legal via airbud rule. Glover can't seem to figure out what's happening and has to bail. Knowing he can't keep taking elbows, Jiri rolls to turtle. Doing so quickly he's able to dump Glover off despite a crafty armbar attempt by the veteran. He thus finishes the round on top and wins it in my scorecard, getting in some payback. The next grappling exchange comes as Glover shoots a bad faith takedown while he rocked. Jiri intelligently stuffing the head, high-stepping, and then Toriano passing to the side to throw hammer fists. Glover pops back up to his knees for another bad faith attempt, and Jiri responds ideally with a good sprawl, but betrays one of the principles of his system. Much like Vadim Nemkov in our first fight, he attempts a shitty anaconda and is punished by Glover, who shucks off the loose hold and builds back up. Soon after Glover attempts a lazy double, it's evident that the damage landed by Jiri is continuing to affect his grappling. In the last 2 minutes of the round, Jiri gets overzealous in throwing a flying knee, and whiffs while simultaneously getting hit by a left hook. As he scrambles to recover, Glover teleports onto his back, but Jiri is able to slowly recover, twisting back and forth until he can fight a leg in and regain half guard. Unfortunately, he doesn't quite have enough space to employ his usual knee shield, and Glover simply steps over back into the mount. The Brazilian tees off on his face, and our Czech weeb barely survives. Jiri is once again able to stuff some takedowns in round 3, with that head stuff to high step combo looking brilliant. Wrestlers will also call that defense a limp leg. You start to understand that his system is to defend doubles and inside singles with that tactic, and outside singles with a sprawl, and framing back to fire a knee if they don't bag off. It's a brilliant integration of both wrestling and Muay Thai. Glover pulls guard instead of trying to get back up in good faith, and Jiri wisely lets him up. Jiri is looking like he's starting to solve Glover, but like the absolute fucking tank that he is, Teixeira just eats a knee in order to get in super deep on a single, with Glover basically doing a move that looks like he's arm dragging his leg. Yes, I know a leg drag is a different position, but fuck you, jiu-jitsu. In a pulling motion that removes his base. As Jiri rolls, he gives up his back before sitting out to side control, once again understanding the knowledge of pins. You can actually see him actually trying to immediately turn to north-south, but Glover is starting to understand what he's doing. Employing a sort of half-cradle, Jack Slack calls catch wrestler side control. Jiri, however, capitalizes on what looks like a really lazy Kimura attempt by turning in, getting underneath and looking for a bad faith double leg that forces Glover to let him up, although he did put him in perfect position for a tombstone piledriver. This is a fucking chess match at this point, with each man doing a call in response to each other's tactics. Jiri tees off with body shots and uppercuts before sprawling out on Glover's desperation takedown. Jiri beats the piss out of him before committing a tactical blunder with a Darce choke attempt to wrong side arm triangle, which Glover uses to wrestle up with his iron will and sweep Jiri into his own full guard. Thankfully for him, Glover's face is ground beef and both are content to stall out the round in full guard. Glover has to force something with momentum swinging away from him, and so he doggedly pursues a double, easily completing it against Jiri as the angle is shot against the cage diminishes the ability to sprawl. He falls into side control, and how does Jiri respond? Say it with me, folks. He attempts to go into north-south. This twisting bites him in the ass, as when he points his hips the wrong way and allows Teixeira to take mount, a rare positional tactical error by Jiri, who normally only kneecaps himself with stupid submission attempts. Jiri narrowly survives an arm triangle attempt with his freaky flexible shoulders, and then completes a gorgeous back roll and a lovely callback to our first fight. Jiri does some good work by passing to half, but Glover gets into deep half guard and wrestles up, shucking him off to the side and taking the back, before Jiri misaligns and gets back top position in full guard. If this sounds frantic, that's because it is, and I'm nearly having a panic attack just by writing this. This dominance ends the round, but unfortunately for Jiri, he is on the losing end of all the judges' scorecard despite being tied on mine, and he's going to need a finish in round 5 whether he understands that or not. Almost immediately, Glover nearly finishes Jiri on the feet, and in an all-time low IQ move by an otherwise savvy fighter, Glover pulls the ghillie, with Yuri's head slipping out before he's even reached the ground. Funnily enough, I actually think that his top knot helps him here, as he can't fully get the ghillie in because of it. I have no idea why Glover does this, and it ends up looking like the world's worst pro wrestling DDT attempt. This gives Jiri enough time to gather himself, and he returns to standing. Glover once again rocks him and goes for a double, but Jiri responds well, sprawling as best he can, and despite being taken down to a knee as Glover switches to a single, plants a hand on the ground and breakdances back into space. This fight then properly becomes a high-octane wrestling match, with an explosive double from Glover landing, but as Jiri understands how urgent things are, he immediately explodes back up, trying to hit a switch, but being smothered. Jiri's actually doing great, intelligent wrestling here. He just simply doesn't have enough space due to the cage, and thus is put into the bottom of mount. Fortunately, as we've established, the fence is the friend of the European, and he gives his all to one last explosion, back rolling into a back take of his own, and fervently pursuing the back of Glover, who attempts to turn back in and face the danger with a Granby roll. He actually passes a side control with what looks like a brute force knee cut before getting to crucifix. If Glover's too tired at this point, he could finish it here, and this is where we reach check and mate. Glover uses the last of his strength to get up to turtle, and Jiri locks in for what I'll describe a figure 4 bulldog choke, a rear naked choke from the position of a typical wrestling or catch wrestling back position / bulldog choke. Glover, exhausted, battered, and currently losing blood to his brain, is forced to tap. Despite having one more fight to go, this is undoubtedly a masterpiece in vindication of Jiri's ideology. Despite Glover being so good at orthodox positional PJJ, Jiri's crafty set of subversions and inventive applications of his wrestling fundamentals have carried him over to championship status. Ironically, it wasn't his virtuoso striking that carried him over the relatively unathletic stoic coelacanth of a champion, but his adherence to discipline and his core ideology of scramble-based defense. Necessity is the mother of invention, and to shore up his deficiencies as a strike-first fighter, he's created an oddly coherent game plan. He is now a champion, and I sure hope nothing bad happens, and he's fucked up his shoulder. Well, that was fun while it lasted. Versus Alex Pereira, first fight. This fight is interesting to me as a failure, as Jiri basically only relies heavily on grappling once he's already fucked, whereas I think he could have started trying to grapple and get a win. While Jiri is rarely outclassed on the feet, he is here, and I think if he employed smart clinch entries, which I described earlier, he could absolutely dog walk a pure kickboxer like Alex with clinch throws into ground and pound. If somehow someone who's a part of Jiri's team sees this, first of all, tell him I love him, and secondly, tell him to go to a judo or even better, a combat sambo gym to drill more clinch takedowns. Please and thank you. In the first round, about halfway through, Jiri does something very smart in my opinion, using his forward pressure to walk Alex into the cage and shoot for the high crotch. Alex ostensibly stalls with a bad faith ghillie against the cage, and Jiri hits a high crotch that he just brute forces, before ending most of the round on top, until Alex gets up with about 10 or 15 seconds to go. This, in my opinion, wins Jiri the round. Basically, the only grappling Alex is good at, in my opinion, is defensive cage work that specializes in defending wrestling, as he showed in his losing effort against Magomed Ankalaev, as while he did lose, mostly due to the fear of the wrestling, he did defend every single takedown well. If I were Jiri or his corner, I would recommend him to try to adopt something like a wizard kick, or insert Japanese judo name here, employed by Islam Makhachev to great success, or a foot sweep, as it's both energy efficient and less basic than what he's doing here. Wrestling, when you aren't a wrestler, gasses you out, and it can't be great to have to deadlift Alex here for a takedown. He doesn't shoot again until already rocked by a counterpunch, which leads to a TKO from elbows. He did a good job using striking to pressure Alex to the cage, but walked in allowing Alex to sit down on a counterpunch. I think if he shot as soon as Alex was within a foot of the cage, backpedaling instead of waiting, there'd be almost a zero chance of Alex chinning him short of a very well-timed knee. This is something a proper large fight gym could teach Jiri, so maybe that's an option in his future to train most of the year at home and do his fight camps with someone like American Top Team or Extreme Couture, as I believe in someone like Eric Nixick in general, but also to be able to harness the weirdness of Jiri into an even more dangerous form. Jiri is a constant being of growth and evolution, as we saw with his vastly improved head movement in his most recent fight against Jamal Hill. I think his grappling is already optimized for what he wants to do to an impressive degree, and with some changes in philosophy, as well as fine-tuning certain techniques, he could actually become an elite offensive grappler for the light heavyweight division in addition to his defensive chops. I came into this thinking that his grappling was some sort of fluke, but after watching roughly 15 to 20 of his fights, I can no longer make any excuse as to why he's not incredibly good as a defensive grappler. He's a man of great focus and tenacity, and although he's unorthodox in his application of fundamentals, his fundamentals are nonetheless great.